Okay, so it's 12 o'clock, so we'll kick off. So a very warm welcome to all of you to our CV writing workshop webinar. I am Afroz Merchant, one of the co-founders of the Keep Britain Working campaign, and I also work for the Read Group. I'll be your host on the webinar today. I'd also like to welcome our key speakers for today. Firstly, Andrea Raven-Hill, Regional Manager for the Read Education branch. Andrea is going to conduct a majority of the workshop today, bringing to life his 16 years of recruitment experience and sharing with you her top tips on exactly what it is that recruiters are looking for in your CV. Our second speaker is Christopher Young, Operations Manager at Read in Partnership. Chris will talk us through the new Job Entry Targeted Support Program, also known as JETS, what it's about, and how you may be able to gain access to this. We'll be answering all your questions at the end, but please feel free to write them in the chat box as we go along. And also let us know who you'd like those questions to be addressed to. Before we kick off the workshop, I'd also like to tell you a little bit about the Keep Britain Working campaign. The Keep Britain Working campaign was launched in April this year with the purpose of preserving jobs and protecting livelihoods. We've been doing this by sharing information and free resources, connecting people to opportunities, and collaborating to inspire change. To be a part of this campaign and receive regular updates, articles, invitations to webinars such as this one, please sign up at www.keepbritainworking.com. We'll also share this link with you on our chat, and you can also follow us on Twitter at KeepBritWorking. Without further ado, I'd now like to hand over to Andrea.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Afros. Yes, my name is Andrea and I have worked for Read Education for 16 years. I don't necessarily think of myself as an expert, but obviously 16 years has given me exposure to a lot of client feedback and candidate feedback about what does and doesn't work on a CV. I'm going to break it down into 6 key points, but I guess when I was asked to do this, I thought about what I myself would do if I was creating a CV now based on all of the things that I've learned over my time in recruitment, and how I would therefore structure that in a CV. So we're going to take that across 6 key points, and I will expand on each point. However, at the end, after Chris has spoken, there will, as Afro said, be the opportunity for questions. Now, while I've been employed for over 20 years in different jobs, so you might think, well, therefore my CV would be potentially different. Actually, the key messages I'm going to get from this would also be what I would tell my son as he leaves school to think about when he's doing his first CV. So hopefully that will cover what everybody needs to know. So we start with creating a summary, and I guess the reason that that is important. The summary is and should be the first thing an employer reads. Studies have actually shown that hiring managers spend between 5 and 7 seconds looking at a CV before deciding whether to continue. In fact, James Reed himself wrote a book called The 7-Second CV, which I'd highly recommend. So for me, the summary is sort of the trailer for the rest of your CV. It's sort of the back of the DVD, the film synopsis that would encourage the reader to, well, watch or in this case, read on. So ideally, you'd start with your professional title, and that way you've got your professional identity at the forefront of the reader's mind as they move through the rest of your CV. So mine, for example, would say Education Recruitment Manager with over 16 years experience. However, if you are a student or relatively new to the world of employment, you can change that to be your objective. So an example could be Graduate Marketing Specialist with a keen interest in social media driven campaigning. And I know I've said the need to hook the reader's attention, but you also want to have an impact. And the best advice I can give in this regard is to use tangible examples where possible. A lot of people, it's not just some, a lot of people fall into the trap of overusing adjectives. I'm sure most recruiters or hiring managers have read, I'm a passionate, driven, enthusiastic hiring manager, sales professional who thrives working as part of a team. A lot of the time we're going to switch off. They don't mean anything, and they're really opinions rather than sort of evidence-based statements. I always say to my teams when they're writing CVs for their candidates, you wouldn't put apathetic on your CV, so why put enthusiastic? I could actually do a whole webinar on buzzwords. The best rule of thumb, I would say, with your summary is to try use data or quantifiable, tangible examples of success and capability. That way, you're immediately demonstrating your value to them. Also, I would suggest looking at the job description, so try and link some of the wording and the requirements to things that you've done in the summary. So it should be quite clear in the advert what the most important requirements in the role are. If you can link them or showcase transferable skills here, it will definitely help them keep reading past that 7-second mark, which is obviously quite important. And it shows them straight away that you can do the things that they need. So take the time to edit your CV for every role. I've spoken about this at length with people when thinking about what I would want to sort of get across today, and I think every person should have a really good skeleton CV written that for every job you apply for, you tailor. So it's not as big a job every time. You're not having to rewrite your CV, but you are sort of linking it very much to the job that you're applying for. And in that, I would say think about the hirer. When you apply for a job, you've already decided that you want the job, you know what you want from the job. But it's not about what you want at that point, it's about what they want. So you're trying to demonstrate your value and what, I suppose, value and benefit you can bring to them. And my final piece of advice on the summary is actually to do it last. So we're going to talk through some of the other things that you would do across your CV now. I would do all of those first and then do your summary last, because you can have a look then at the highlights. You can analyse what you think they are and pick 3 to 5 and use those in your summary. If you're fortunate enough to have more than that, then pick the ones that really speak and resonate most with the role that you're applying for. And again, if you've only recently graduated or you're new to working, you can absolutely still create a very powerful summary. It's likely that the other applicants that are applying for that role have got a similar level of experience to you. So you're using that summary to think about sort of any part-time, volunteer work, any successes that you've had in your academic life and highlighting them there. And again, if you do this after you do the rest of your CV, then hopefully it should be quite, well, it should be a lot easier to do. It's never easy to write about yourself. So that's sort of what I would suggest around creating a summary. I'm going to move on now to being succinct, which feels a bit ironic given that I've just spoken at you for ages about creating a summary, but being succinct is something I have to work on in my everyday life and career. But in CV terms, less is more. There are rarely jobs that require pages and pages of detailed information. As a rule, most stuff can be condensed. I would suggest a CV can be 1 to 2 pages long, no more than that. However, some people advise a page for a decade of experience. I will go into a little bit more detail about what I said earlier in terms of being quantifiable and detailing your accomplishments. But when it comes to writing your work history, and we'll touch on it in a little while, but avoid just writing the job description under each job. We all know that an English teacher will have sort of taught lessons and marked the work, but what did they achieve? What did their process of teaching and marking bring to their pupils? And they're the things that you really need to think about demonstrating. Big and bulky fonts can absolutely make it really hard to read a CV. And from personal experience, when you're presented with a CV that is text heavy, pages long, bulky font, it can be a little off-putting. And I understand at that point why people might not want to read past 7 seconds. And when I was asked to do this webinar, I looked into, I did a bit of research around fonts and what people should be looking at. And I learned with some absolute emphasis that Comic Sans was voted the worst font in the world. And everybody I said that to had such a strong opinion about, oh my God, it's absolutely terrible. We hate Comic Sans. So it demonstrates that people have strong opinions. For those that are interested, I looked into it, and Calibri, Helvetica and Garamond were voted some of the best. So something to think about when you're writing your CV. Clip art is something you want to avoid. Some people might not even understand that somebody would still put that on your CV, but they absolutely do. It's quite outdated and there's just no place for it on a professional CV. I know a lot of academic establishments would suggest you put a photograph on. I personally wouldn't. I don't think any role that I'm applying for, unless I was fortunate enough to be a model, would be your appearance wouldn't be relevant, so I would leave it off, but that's just personal preference. Bullet points are actually the best way to keep a CV from looking bulky, overly wordy. So where possible to use bullet points, then you absolutely should. And then when thinking about summarising your qualifications, you need to keep older data off here. Some people go right back to primary school on the CV, and it's just absolutely not relevant. High school's often not that relevant. You can summarise your exam results if needed. And even when you're putting courses on there, people will go into great depth of listing what a course entails, but most people, certainly the hiring managers, would know. You can highlight anything that's particularly relevant to the role that you're applying, but for the most part, listing the course you've been on is enough. It's a really easy mistake to add content for content's sake. So you want to only really talk about things that you're very proficient in or that are less common. So, for example, if you've done a marketing degree, it's absolutely necessary as part of that degree that you would be proficient in Microsoft, so you just don't need to add it, it's a given. So when you're thinking about all the additional things that you want to put on your CV, you ought to think about, is that less common? Is that going to make me stand out? Is that going to be something that is different to the other people that are applying? So just avoid content for the sake of content. So hopefully at this point we've got a good summary, or we will have, and we're mindful of keeping it succinct. We can look at some of the basic content. So as I said at the start, skills and summary should definitely be at the top. It should be the first thing that the hirer is reading, and it should be a good blend of your personal characteristics and professional capabilities, being as tangible as possible. There's quite a bit of debate about what next comes next, whether it be education or work experience. I don't think it matters, provided that you're thinking about the content and the look. But I'm going to start on work experience, which is a detailed summary of your career. Hands up, I won't be able to judge or see you, but it's an oxymoron, right? Detailed summary of your career is quite a hard thing to do, but it is a very important part of your CV because it links your skills and your work history and shows the employer what you can do and what you have already done. Generally, you would list your work experience in reverse chronological order, placing the most recent jobs first. That's the thing that people are going to be the most interested in seeing. You'd list the company and the dates of employment, as well as your title and the role. But then the best advice I can give you is not to list the job description. So ask yourself if what you're writing could be written on anybody else's CV. If the answer is yes, you perhaps need to rethink what you're putting, because you're just listing the sort of the job advert, I guess. What you need to do in this section is focus on what you were able to do and what you could bring to the role. So your achievements, you know, any awards, any successes. You know, if you increased revenue by 10% or you decreased costs by 10%, potential managers will love to read about that. They like tangible, specific measurables. Again, and I'm going to keep saying this, look at the job advert and try and tailor or highlight any skills that are on there that are relevant and transferable. So look at the same keywords, the same language that they use, and try and use action words like, you know, I coached, I trained, I sold. It's very different to what we talked about earlier. Adjectives are fillers, whereas words like this will highlight the specific actions that you had in that role. And don't worry if you're a grad or new to work, you can absolutely use this section to sort of highlight your skills and placements. It's what we call a functional CV, and that's more about organising and highlighting your skills rather than your job titles. So you can still use that to support your application. And that's sort of all I would say around work experience, just making sure that you're keeping things measurable and specific to your successes and capability in those roles. We move on now to education and how much we include here. I would absolutely always include education if for no other reason we expect to see it. It's always been on there, and I think if somebody just didn't have education whatsoever, we would probably question why that is. If you're a recent graduate, you're going to obviously talk far more about your education than, say, somebody who's 20 years into their career. And there are definitely some jobs, such as, you know, a doctor or a lawyer that sort of require specific qualifications, and of course in that instance you're absolutely going to include it and highlight it. Like your job, you would start with the name of the academic establishment, the dates you attended. If your degree or qualification is related to the job you're applying for, certainly emphasise that in this section. But if it doesn't, you can simply list your achievements. In terms of high school, it's often not necessary, but if you want to refer to your GCSEs, rather than sort of list them all, just say something like 11 GCSEs A to C grade. If you've just left high school or college, you can definitely use this section to highlight what you did and your successes in there. You never need to list your primary school education. It's just not relevant. And I know I've gone back to that again, but it's surprising at how often people do. So finally, well, not finally, hobbies and interests. It's a section a lot of people leave out because they think it's not important or relevant. I would suggest that if you want to talk about watching Netflix, long walks on the beach, then do leave it out. People do those things. Everybody does those things. So you want to be thinking about things here that are going to actually set you apart, make you stand out, and really think about your hobbies might link to professional desirable traits. So for example, if you can play an instrument, that shows us that you can see through something that's quite difficult. You've got the dedication to practice and learn something. If you play cricket as part of a team, it shows you can commit to the training. It shows that you can give a lot of your personal time up to something you can actually work and operate as part of a team. But it shouldn't be more than a paragraph long, and make sure that you keep it professional. There are certain things you wouldn't necessarily put on there. So just think about how it would make you appear or how it would look to the hirer. And then finally, I'm just going to touch on social media. It can definitely be as harmful as it is helpful. I'm sure everybody on this call has heard some form of story about how somebody's social media impacted their work life. We've all seen those stories, ironically, on Facebook or similar. But more and more employers are Googling potential hires. So make sure that your own social media accounts are private, they're locked down, they're inaccessible to anybody outside of your friendship and family group that you have on there. You can include social media accounts that will boost your profile. So for example, if you are applying for a marketing or PR role and you have really good accounts that demonstrate your work in this arena, then absolutely you should include them. LinkedIn can be a great account to use, especially if you've got a lot of testimonials or recommendations. However, if you've not been on there recently or you've put negative posts, then it's probably just not best to include it. I think the rule of thumb for me is to think about the role that you're applying for and only include social media profiles if it would actually boost your own personal profile within the company and increase your chances. So that's just a little bit around the order that you might want to put your CV in and some of the things to consider within those sections. I'm just going to move on to a couple of sort of finishing tips, I guess, on your CV. I have said it throughout the webinar and I will keep emphasising it, and if it's one message that you take away from today, I will feel it's been successful, but tailor the CV to the job. Reread the job description, research the company, their ethos, their culture, and throughout your CV, trying to tailor it to the job is going to make you stand out against other applicants. It seems like a lot of work. If you've got a good skeleton CV, it really isn't. But if you're not willing to invest that bit of time, then I would ask yourself how much you really want the job. Provide reference details where possible, and avoid putting refs on request. So list the reference, contact details, their position, but make sure that you've told the reference, the person that's going to be giving the reference, that you have done this. So tell them what the position is, because that way that they're expecting it, they can really highlight your skills in that role. But don't do this, don't list that if you're going to be sending your CV out on bulk, which I wouldn't recommend anyway. But if you are, a reference is a referee reference is not going to be happy if they receive 20-30 requests over a couple of days. And I know from when we've gone out and sought references, it doesn't sit well with them. And finally, it sounds quite obvious, but don't rely on spell check, which I do, I have to say, in my everyday life. And modern technology is fantastic, it really helps. But if I type but instead of hut or vice versa, spell check isn't going to pick it up because that is not a spelling mistake, it's a typo. So just make sure you read it, and I would recommend that you use your contacts for this, because sometimes when you've written something, your brain sort of reads faster, and because it knows what you put, it doesn't necessarily pick up on those mistakes. So make sure you use your contacts to help you. If nothing else, they might be able to think about things that you haven't thought of to put in your CV, because it's quite hard to talk about yourself. And finally, use a professional email address. It's absolutely free to set up sort of Gmail, Hotmail accounts, and there are no excuses for things like lexilovejeff23@gmail.com. Keep it as close to your name as is possible. I would tell you some of the funny ones I've seen over the years, but this is a professional webinar. However, the point to note from that is that they've absolutely stuck in my mind as things that were unprofessional. So just make sure that you're using the free access to Gmail and Hotmail and putting a professional CV. Which brings me hopefully nicely, and I hope you've got things from it, but onto the end of the CV section. Hopefully you've got enough to just be able to pull together a strong CV that showcases what an asset you can be to a company. But a lot of the time it is that an application is asked for you to consider also putting together a cover letter. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of points within that. Before you start, and I'm repeating myself, but think about why you're applying and then research the company and what they do. So you're looking at their competition, their ethos, their culture. And again, like before, you're going to tailor this as much as possible within your covering letter. You have to start strong. So much like the CV and the summary, you have to start strong. Your opening line should be straight to the point, and it should demonstrate your worth in one sentence, which is a big ask because it feels really braggy, and you have to be braggy at this point. It's really important. You start with writing about who you are, why you're applying, and you move on to why you think you're suitable. Again, you need to look at being specific. Don't send out cover letters that are standard to lots of different roles. If you don't have the time to tailor your cover letter and be specific, it's almost worth not doing. You're keen for them to invest in you and to take the time to invest in your career. They're going to be able to tell pretty quickly if you're not sort of keen to take the time to write a bespoke cover letter to them. And be professional always. Avoid saying negative things. For example, you might put on there why you're looking to leave your current role. Avoid the temptation if it's for, you don't get on with your manager or you don't like the company. Do not put that in your cover letter, even if that is the case. Think of another reason that you want to leave and why you're applying. And as before, thinking about the font and the look and the feel and the flow. We're asking for perfect. We want the Goldilocks here, not too long, not too short. We need it to be just right. I would err on the side of caution and keep it to around half a side of A4. And if possible, address the hiring manager. So often their name will be in the job advert. If it isn't, you can take the time to pick up the phone and call and find out who the hiring manager is. Especially if they haven't put that in the advert and you then address that person, it's going to show that you've taken the time to do that. So it's to try do that. And avoid, if there's a skill that you don't have, avoid putting that in the cover letter. It's not a time to draw attention to your areas of development. That's something you can discuss later. Rather just use this to focus on what you can bring. And again, I keep saying it, but keep it tangible. So the structure really should be your opening line, why you think you're right for the role, and what you can bring. And when you close, be sure to recap. So reiterating why you feel you're the right person. If you have the name of the contact, then you would close with yours sincerely. If not, you would close with yours faithfully. And finally, there's a massive difference between passionate and pleading. So I'm applying for this role because my position, because of your position in the market and your company values are very attractive to me, is far more professional than this is my dream role. I would give everything to have it. Even if you feel that passionately, you need to try and find another way to get that across. That sort of brings me to the end of I guess my webinar. Everything I've presented to you today is purely a starting point. It's a guide, a rough template, but it will only help you get so far. Never forget that a combination of good CV and covering letter should reflect you both personally and professionally. People absolutely do employ people, and you owe it to yourself to work hard on this aspect of the job cycle, because that is how you will open the door. But CV is only as good as the person behind it. I'm going to hand you over to Chris, who's going to talk you through the JET scheme, and I will be available at the end to answer some of the questions. I hope you found it helpful, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris Young and I am the Operations Manager for the Job Entry Targeted Support Programme that Reed in partnership, amongst others, are delivering on behalf of the UK Government. So in the section that I'll be covering with you today, I'm going to let you know a little bit about what help is on offer across England and Wales for those who have found themselves seeking assistance with their job search and their general employability as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and its toll on the economy. A little bit about the eligibility for the programme and what support is on offer, including our a CV 360 tool, which aims to give programme participants a cutting edge over their competitors when it comes to getting their CVs through to the hiring managers. So with regards then to the programme, JETS is simply standing for Job Entry Targeted Support. It was commissioned by the UK government over the course of the summer in response really to the growing numbers of people who through no fault of their own have found themselves out of work due to the economic situation. The programme exists for those who require relatively light touch support. So it might be that you need help with CVs, you might need help with application forms, covering letters, maybe trying to identify what immediate job goals are in your local area. It could be some confidence issues as well. And it's a 6-month programme that support is provided for. You get a dedicated employment advisor and a suite of courses that you can access both digitally and online that we'll go through. It's entirely voluntary, so it is there if you want it, and if you don't, it is not a mandatory programme. And it has a mixture of face-to-face and remote support options that are available. Obviously, we all find ourselves in so many different parts of the country at the moment that are on different levels of restriction, and so 90% of our support is actually delivered via the likes of Microsoft Teams or the telephone. But we do realise that some are digitally excluded, and perhaps you know people who don't have an email address, or they have had to maybe cut their internet connection. There is face-to-face provision available for those people as well in their local towns across England and Wales. So in terms of who it's for, it is for basically anyone who has find themselves out of work most recently. They have to have had a minimum of 13 weeks in receipt of a benefit such as universal credit or the new style job seekers. They have to be aged 18 and above in England and 16 above in Wales. And essentially people who just need some light touch support. If you know we've got as there are many people who need more intensive support because of major health problems or disabilities, there are actual other programs that Read in Partnership amongst others provide. This one's much more about rapid response to try and help people go back into employment in the coming months. So therefore, if you are quite confident, you've got a perfect CV, you've got everything, you don't need support, obviously it's not going to be for you. But similarly, if you're at the other end of the spectrum and you feel that 6 months wouldn't be enough to support you, then there are other programs that you can avail of. To get referred across to the programme, you just need to go into your local Job Centre Plus or contact your local Job Centre Plus and express your interest, and they can refer you across. So what's on offer? As I've mentioned before, you do get a dedicated employment advisor, and that means that you've got someone who works for Read in Partnership, so they're an employment specialist. They've been trained in what we do, working on our background of 20 years of welfare to work experience, and on top of the general 60 years of recruitment experience and know-how that the Read Group does have. And our areas that we cover are the northeast of England and South London. However, there is coverage right across England and Wales. And so again, you just need to go to your local job centre and they can refer you across to other companies that are delivering this on behalf of the government. But your employment advisor is going to be there, and they're going to get to understand what it is that you're looking for. So what are the types of roles that you're interested in, and similarly, what are you not interested in? They will look at what your needs are. So what do you feel that you would most benefit from? So sometimes that's one-to-one coaching, it's information, advice and guidance, as we would call it, and other times it's a bit more training related. And we've got a full suite of support when it comes to that training. So we have in-house trainers. So again, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's remote, you can join the sessions via the likes of Microsoft Teams and Zoom. And we do everything on courses from interview skills, CV skills, transferable skills, and that's obviously a really important one because some of you are in sectors at the moment that are experiencing hardship and you're maybe looking, I need to do something just in the meantime until my sector recovers, then the transferable skills course can really assist you in sort of look at getting a good self-analysis about this is actually what I can do and this is the other industries that need those exact same skills, and then from that your advisor can help tailor your CV to capture that. We also look at the likes of application forms amongst many others. We then have a range of health and wellbeing support. I think everyone acknowledges that 2020 has been a very, very, very tough year for everyone, and certainly for some and those who, through no fault of their own, have found themselves without work. It is very possible that you can grieve a job, and it's a loss that, you know, anyone who's went through that experience, myself included, can really relate to. And you can go through the various phases of that, and we recognise that. So we do have health and wellbeing support on offer, everything from managing anxiety, self-confidence, relaxation techniques. Maybe some of you are struggling with sleep. And similarly, then there's other courses such and help, both on a course base and a one-to-one provision on the likes of nutrition, smoking cessation, and so forth. What we also do is we have our own team of recruitment consultants that we call recruitment managers, and they go and they basically source exclusive vacancies so that they are for our participants, so that hopefully we can try and secure more people getting through to that interview stage, and those are communicated on a weekly basis to our participants. We also offer our participants a free Reed Wellbeing, so it's another company within the Reed Group, a free health and wellbeing check. Now that's normally worth $19.99. It's completely confidential. You don't have to share it with us and the findings, but it is a check there that analyses all different aspects of your life, from your financial well-being to your emotional well-being, your relationships, and your social network, as well as your physical and mental health. And it can help just sometimes identify what some of the issues are that you're facing, so that if you do want support, we can then signpost you either in-house to our own health and wellbeing service, or to other specialist partners that are out there in your local communities. Just moving on then to our next slide. The other element that we do offer our participants from the Reed group as well is that Reed Online has over 47,000 different courses. So if you were to go and type into Google Reed courses, you will see there's everything there, from guitar lessons through to management and leadership development, language skills, and so forth. And our participants can avail of that. So anyone who is interested in doing a course, a vocational related course that will help them retrain for either an interim or another type of role that they're interested in, we will print you out a voucher up to £50 worth of value for you then to go and do. And that's something that you can add on to your CV, so that I've seen that some questions are already coming through about what do I do if I've got an employment gap, do I list it? These are things that you will be able to list in your CV, to say that you haven't sort of just sat still during this very hard time, that you've actually upskilled and developed yourself, and that will help you hopefully gain an edge over your competitors in the job market. We also can provide financial support. Obviously, people are finding themselves in real hardship situations, and so say, for example, you manage to get a job, you might need some help with the first week or week's worth of travel, or perhaps it's getting workwear or things like that. And again, this support is available to us because it is 100% funded by the UK government. It's not free, it is funded. It has cost them a considerable amount of money. So the resources are here, and we're here to support people where they need it. And it's in recognition of that there is that financial support for that transition to go into work, as well as the funded courses for that development side while you're still seeking work. Finances are a major thing, and we will never, or no government programme, to be honest, will ever ask you to do something that's going to leave you financially worse off. but it's very hard to work out what that was because there's so many changes to the benefit system, and many of you will have been used to having a particular salary where maybe there was no top-up support from the government, where some of you have, and you're maybe thinking, well, what if I take another job and it's 16 hours as opposed to 24 hours, or what if I take this full-time job and it's now going to be at 21,000 as opposed to 36,000, I won't be able to live. There is actually a lot of financial support out there, so we can actually run what's called a better off calculator for you. So whether you're going into work and you've got yourself a job, and you just phone us up and say, right, I'm on program, I just need to find out what I'm entitled to, we can do that. Or whether it's helping you frame your job search by looking for jobs that is going to leave you financially better off, we can then model it on, this is how much you would get in your hands after tax and your expenses on 16, 24, 37, whatever hours, and at different salary levels, because there is top-up support there. So you might get top-up support with your council tax, your housing, and a range of other benefits, working tax credits and so forth. The other thing then that we obviously have is our online career centre, and the online career centre really is something that we have spent an awful lot of money investing into. It means that there's 24/7 support. So yes, you'll get the support of our recruitment consultants, the support of our employment advisors and our course trainers for both skills and for the health and well-being. But then you've got this digital resource that you can access either on your smartphone or on a desktop PC 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is everything from videos on interview skills, top tip guides, there's podcasts on the latest employment and labour market trends, as well as advice for how to approach employers speculatively, or how to conduct yourself at interviews and assessment centres. There's a CV builder, so it can help you build a CV. If you need those basic blocks, that's there for you as well. There's some courses that are on there, so there's everything from self-awareness through to confidence and interview skills, and you can actually use it as a master job search tool. So you can actually input, these are the roles that I'm interested in, this is the areas I'm interested in, the salary, and it'll actually bring you every single time that you log on, or daily, it'll bring you all the relevant job that they're advertised, not just on read.com, but also on the Indeeds, the Monster, the government website. It pulls all that information through for you. So it's a fantastic resource. But perhaps the most pioneering and most relevant tool that we have today on our online portal is what's known as CV 360. So this is pioneering technology. We all know that these days recruitment is largely done digitally, and we see that the rise of LinkedIn in terms of recruitment has had a major impact. But nowadays, hiring managers and recruitment consultants typically log on to a job platform or portal, and they'll type in the skills or the buzzwords that they need, and the strongest come up to the top. And we obviously need to make sure that our participants who we support to try and find work can have that lead advantage, so that they are getting returned higher. If you think about it, job portals work a little bit like using Gumtree or AutoTrader, and that the older your advert is, it goes further down the list, and similarly the least relevant it is, the further it goes down as well. So what CV 360 does is you can put in your CV as many times as you want. It's going to run 58 different checks on your CV. So it's going to be looking at 6 different areas. What is the file type? Is it compatible with most other employers and hiring managers? What's the presentation and the structure looking like? What is the content like? What are the skills included? And also, what is the language that you're using? Are you using, just, you know, relation to what Andrea had talked about, are you using action words? Are you using appropriate language that maybe switches off employers? And what I'll do is I'll actually give your CV a percentage of how effective it is and likely to be returned by a hiring manager seeking the particular job that you're after. And that is just a groundbreaker. That has you've never been able to check that before. So you can then go and take the feedback that CV 360 gives you. You can work either independently on it or with your employment advisor, and you can redo it and you can keep on checking until you've got the most effective CV. So it really is a fantastic and cutting edge technology. One thing that we're finding at the moment, and this comes as no surprise, I'm sure, to most of you, the market is candidate rich, and that means that employers are able to essentially choose people that are normally beyond their reach. I've been conducting over 60 interviews over the most recent weeks, and I've been just absolutely gobsmacked by some of the caliber and the previous seniority of applicants for that. And therefore, we're back in a stage where basically a lot of people are not even making it past the CV sift. So if your CV isn't standing out in those 7 seconds to an employer, if it's just full of job descriptions as opposed to achievements, if it's got the wrong language, if it's got spelling, punctuation and grammar mistakes, then regrettably it is going to go into the bin. It's going to go into the reject pile, and that's not obviously what you want in this very tough market. You need your CV to stand out, and so that's why it's fantastic to be part of this conference today. I think everything that Andrea has said is spot on, but certainly for those of you who are unemployed and are eligible, definitely feel free to speak to us, ask questions afterwards, go into your local job centre, because these types of tools that Read in Partnership offer and our JETS programme really just might help you get that step above. But that's it from me, so thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Chris. And thank you, Andrea, for your top tips on the CV writing workshop as well. We'll quickly get into the questions now. So the first question we have here is for Andrea from Anonymous. What is the best way to tailor a CV for a new role or a changing career?
Thank you, Afros. I would suggest it's pretty similar to any CV that you want to do. I wouldn't change that anyway. Having a skeleton template and using that to tailor it to each role that you apply for would be the same regardless of whether that was a new role or changing career. Whatever career you've done previously, there will almost certainly be some sort of tangible skills that you can pull across to the new role, and I would imagine that's why you're applying. And so highlighting the things that you have done either in your personal or professional life that would lend themselves to the new career would be something that you would want to include. In the summary, you can make reference to why you're changing career and what you think you can bring. But with everything like that, you're thinking about the skills that you have acquired, regardless of that job, and how you can apply that to the new career or skill set required in the job that you're applying for. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Andrea. And the next question we have again is for yourself from Liz. And Liz asks, how do you cover being partway through a course, for example, ILM diploma? I am 60% through, so I would want to include that on the CV.
Liz, absolutely, I would want to include it if I was 60% partway through a course. You know, you're in the home straight, so absolutely you would include it. As I mentioned before in the CV section, where you're doing your education and courses, you can make reference to the fact that that is a course that you're partway through. Nobody would have any objection to you having not completed it. The fact that you're doing that course certainly would show that you are trying to upskill yourself, and that's a very desirable quality. So Liz, yes, absolutely include it, and just make reference to the fact that you are partway through.
Amazing. The next question we have again for Andrea from MJ. How far back on your career should you go? Last 10 years or further back?
I guess, Liz, it would depend, sorry, MG, I guess it would depend on what the relevance of the prior 10 years to the 10 years that you're talking about have in terms of the role that you're applying for. So if you've got 30 years worth of work and 20 years of those are absolutely not relevant to the role and aren't necessarily got transferable skills, it's not necessarily important to include it or necessarily to go massively in depth. You can perhaps list those jobs. It's a hard question to answer because it really depends on each person, how much they've worked. Are you talking about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, what the roles were? So the thing that I would have in the forefront of your mind is how much relevance does the role that you want to talk about have to the job you're applying for at the moment? I hope that helps.
Thank you. So the next question we have again, Andrea, is for yourself from Annie. If you are a mature person, should you put dates for school and colleges on the CV?
So Anne, being a mature person to me just means that you can bring a lot more experience. So that isn't something that you should ever be afraid of. I think maturity is something that I understand why you would worry about putting that, but I think dates are not necessarily relevant. Certainly, if you've been working for a long time, I would only think about how relevant your current role is to the education that you're applying for, is to the education that you did way back when. It doesn't matter if it's massively relevant, highlight it. The dates, people can generally work out dates anyway from your career and in your high school, so I don't think it necessarily matters, but keep them on there.
Thank you. Andrea, another question for you from Anonymous. How would you address gaps on your CV? Will they automatically put a potential employer off? They're saying that I imagine you shouldn't try to explain any gaps in your CV, but wait until the interview if you do get one.
That's a tough question again to answer because it's really dependent on how many gaps that you have and the reasons for them. I would, if I was looking at CV and there was a lot of gaps, I would probably wonder why if they weren't highlighted. So I personally would highlight gaps on my CV and the reason for them. But if you don't want to put, if perhaps you've got a gap because of ill health, you don't have to put that. You can say that you had a career break. You don't need to talk about why you had a career break. But I would, if you went traveling, I would absolutely say that you went traveling. But anything that you did in that career break or gap of employment that might help your application. So, any voluntary work that you did, any courses that you went on, we had somebody earlier talking about being 60% way through a course. Anything like that you've done in a gap of employment is absolutely something you should highlight. But personally, yes, I would highlight any big gaps with the reason for the gap.
Perfect. Another one from Anonymous for yourself, Andrea. If you are a recent graduate without much work experience, can you use one of your academic professors or advisors as a referee?
Absolutely, you can, and people do. That's absolutely what people do. Find out what the university or the college's policy is on references, because some universities actually try and charge for employers to get references. So if you've got a good relationship with your academic professor or advisor, get their permission to have that on there. But yes, absolutely, of course you should put that on there, because that's very relevant to what you've been doing in your most recent years. So yes, I would include that and use that as a reference.
Thank you. We've got one for Chris from Anonymous. Is it possible to access CV 360 without being on JETS?
No, unfortunately, the way that CV 360 is an actual tool that is licensed, so you have to have a license to do it, and therefore it costs organisations. I know that other organisations do have it. University of Wolverhampton definitely has CV 360, but because it is such new pioneering technology, it's not actually available for free. So it needs to be through a company or program's individual license that you're able to access it, unfortunately. If you're not eligible for JET and you are looking at how effective your CV is, I would advise just the old-fashioned way of doing that really is to put it into a CV builder or use a CV builder, maybe see some of the suggestions that comes up, and then of course get some peer review. So if you have anyone who maybe works in human resources or is a hiring manager, ask them to cast their eye over it. Or I've definitely seen an awful lot of people on LinkedIn do shout outs for help. Of go and help, I need a CV, or can someone check over my CV? And in fact, I've actually seen those and volunteered in the past to do some of that as well. So those are things that you can do, but unfortunately, the tool is a licensed software, so you have to have that.
Thank you, Chris. Another one for Andrea from Anonymous. How can you highlight business results while maintaining confidentiality for your current employer in the information you give?
Yeah, that's a tough question because it's really dependent on how identifiable it would be if you listed some of the big successes that you've had. So you can put anonymous. People expect to see that, and they understand that some industries, it's difficult to maintain confidentiality while looking for a role. So try and demonstrate your capability, I guess, without giving anything away. If you've put anonymous or private and confidential on there, people will understand why you have done that, and believe me, they'll try and figure it out anyway. But you can word it in a way that doesn't give your current employer away. So just be thinking of how you can demonstrate. So if you work for the biggest competitor or the biggest player in that industry, you can just say for a top. You don't have to say the biggest, you don't have to name them, but it is quite difficult. You just have to remember that we will know that that's why you've done that, and so we will try and read between the lines, but just demonstrating successes that you've had whilst keeping it as generic as you can.
Thank you. We have another question, Andrea, from Anonymous. What skills should I list and where should I list them on the CV?
It depends on what your skills are, and again, it's a very difficult question to answer because I would just keep in your mind, is it relevant to the role? Is it going to help you stand out against competitors that are also applying, the other applicants? I would always have them probably around your education section because your education and then skills and courses would probably be better kept together. But you would list skills that would help you that aren't sort of generic everyday skills, and that would list, that you would think will help you stand out as an applicant. Without knowing what those skills are, it's very difficult for me to answer that, I'm afraid, but I hope that helps.
Thank you. Another one for you, Andrea, from Al. How should you approach the question of salary expectations when applying for a job and attaching your CV?
Generally, a job would list what their salary expectations are, so I wouldn't necessarily talk about that in your covering letter or your CV, because if you're invited to interview, for me, that is the best place to talk about that. If you are applying for a job and you're actually hopeful of getting more than the salary that they've advertised, I would suggest, again, you need to at the very least get to the first stage of interview to have really demonstrated your capability and what you're going to bring to that company, so that when it comes to talking about salary, they're probably expecting that you might ask for a little bit more, because that your skill set means that you're the ideal candidate for the job and what you're going to bring. But for me, salary, and again, these are all just my own opinions, but salary doesn't really need to be talked about until you've had the first interview and both of you have had a measure of what the company can bring to you and give to you in terms of your skill set and your professional development, and for the company in terms of what you can give them in skill set and how you're going to be an asset to their organisation. So I would keep it off there until your first interview. But again, that's just an opinion.
Thank you, Andrea. We have another question from Anonymous for yourself. And this one is actually quite generic, and many people are probably confused about this. What file type should your CV be saved as?
Well, I would just suggest you find to have a Word CV. A lot of people use a PDF. I don't think it particularly matters. And you know, a hiring manager isn't going to edit your CV, so a Word is fine. But if you want to use a PDF, that's also fine too.
Perfect. And another one from anonymous Andrea. Would you recommend the use of a professional CV writer?
I would suggest that if you're really struggling to do your CV, then perhaps a CV writer might help. But throughout my presentation, I talked about the element of your own personality and how important it is to get that through on the CV. So it would depend on how well you think a professional CV writer would be able to support that. Certainly working with somebody, but if you are really struggling to do your CV, and some people can't write about themselves, they find it very, very difficult, then of course use one. But most of the time, you know, if you dig a bit deeper, you will find that you can probably put together a good CV with the help of your network or reaching out to contacts, as Chris said earlier.
Thank you. We've got one for Chris from Anonymous. Can anyone anywhere in the UK access the JET scheme, and how do I get onto the scheme?
No worries. So the JET programme is only open to those in England and Wales currently. It was commissioned by the UK government. However, the devolved governments in Scotland and Northern Ireland have opted to do their own. And at the moment, I know certainly in Northern Ireland, where I hail from, that piece is not yet ready. And that there's not currently a rapid response programme. So at the moment it is just in England and Wales. It doesn't matter where you live in England and Wales, every area of there is covered. Read in Partnership does South London and the North East. Now when we say the North East, it actually includes large areas of what would just be termed as the North and East Midlands. So it's actually from Nottinghamshire, northern top of Lincolnshire, and then all the way up to the border with Scotland, and as far west as the likes of Bradford. So, but I know that other companies, I think there's Ingeus, potentially Maximus and others have also been given contracts to deliver this, but there is support across England and Wales for it. If you want to get onto it, you just have to meet those eligibility criteria. So that is that you've been unemployed 13 weeks or more in receipt of either universal credit or New Style Job Seekers Allowance, and you just either phone up or go into your local Job Centre Plus and ask them about the JET programme and if you can be referred. For the time being, I think the government is potentially looking at a way that you can just self-refer onto the programme, but at this moment in time, because we only launched a few weeks ago, it's still through the job centre. Just before I actually go up, just to pop in some of the other questions that have been asked, and a question around the salary, I just want to give a little bit of an anecdote that recently we were dealing with an employer, and they came through to the interview, and the actual candidate asked about salary at the first stage interview, and they asked it whenever they were the conversation was on why they felt they were suitable for the role and why they wanted to work for the company, and that employer just rejected that person out, who actually was doing quite well in the process. But the employer really did take umbrage at it. They just felt that the motivation sounded solely to be around money. So it is one that I would just be wary of if you're going to look at mentioning that either in a CV or a cover letter. And then the other thing that Andrea was talking about there before was those gaps, and I agree. A lot of the people that we support, and I've been in this industry now 11 years, and usually helping the hardest to help people find work. So the long-term unemployed, as opposed to this contract, which is a little bit more of a rapid response. And it is so important, especially in the market that it is at the moment. If your CV doesn't look complete, If it has big gaps in that, reverse chronological history of your work experience or your relevant work experience, your employer might actually remove you from the process just at that CV stage. So definitely I would include them. We encourage our people. So say, for example, they were raised in a family, we'll just get them to put that in. We maybe not War and Peace, but maybe a few bullet points about what skills they've used in that time or acquired in that time from household management and budget and organisation, or it could be that if they were caring for an elderly relative or a partner, we do include that. At the moment, we're putting an awful lot of gaps in at the, from when their employment ended through to now, just to say, seeking work due to the coronavirus pandemic, and that just justifies that for the future employers, because it is such a candidate-rich market. The employers are being incredibly fussy, but that's just my opinion. So I just wanted to hop in on those.
Thank you for that, Chris. We'll have to wrap up the webinar now, so we won't be able to answer any more questions. However, we'll take these questions away and circulate the answers for them with a follow-up, which will come to you through Eventbrite. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us on the webinar today. We have recorded the webinar if you want to go back and rewatch it and work on your CV and your cover letter and get more information about the JETS, or share it with your friends and family. We'll circulate this again via a follow-up email on Eventbrite once we've managed to upload it. And lastly, please don't forget to sign up to the Keep Britain Working campaign for more such webinar and resources. Thank you, everyone. Thank you once again. I hope you found this useful.